Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Patriot's History, where I read through A Patriot's History of the United States. I'm Larry Schweikart, co-author with Michael Allen of A Patriot's History of the United States. Folks, this book, if you haven't read it yet, I mean, you're listening to me, but if you haven't read it, it's amazing. It's in its 40th printing. It's in its 5th edition. And I'm right now working on an update that would essentially be the 6th edition that will take us up through 2023. I'm going to make that free on the Wild World of History website. And probably have that up sometime in the summer. And it'll be a PDF. All you have to do if you want to see the new edition is to go on there and download the PDF. Also, if you check out the Wild World of History website, you'll see the Buy Larry a Coffee button. We're trying to make Patriots History into a video series. We're trying to work with the people who did The Chosen, and we need to do a pilot, and there's some hoops we have to jump through, but there's a good possibility that they will assist us and basically invest in the project. So we've got to get some serious seed money going. So here's how we're doing that. We're going to buy me a coffee. We're going to turn this book into a video series like John Adams or Sons of Liberty. So help me out. Go on and buy Larry coffee. Buy me 5, buy me 50. Whatever you buy in terms of coffees is going to go into the film. And yes, I did make a previous movie called Rockin' the Wall about bringing down the Berlin Wall. So I do know how to make a movie. I've got friends who are very talented at making movies. So we'll get her done. All right. Just a reminder, whenever we start, I am reading from the 15th anniversary edition, the 15th anniversary edition. And as always, if you have an earlier edition, but particularly if you have the 2004, 2006 era, you're going to be way off in the page numbers. The content's going to be pretty much the same till, of course, you get to the more recent stuff, but the page numbers are going to be way off. For example, in the first paperback edition, after the hardcover, Rush Limbaugh had interviewed me for his Limbaugh letter. And so he gave us permission to reprint the entire interview in the front of Patriot's History of the United States. But we later had to take it out because we needed the room to update the book. Every time you add something, you got to take something out. So it's just a warning. All the stuff's in there, but if you have an earlier edition than the 15th anniversary edition, you're going to have to probably search to find some of the page numbers. All right. We are beginning the American Revolution, and I am in 1765 with the Stamp Act, which is the header on page 69. However, before I start with that, last time I gave you a lot of theoretical stuff about the sorry, I had a glitch there. Last time I gave you a lot of theoretical stuff about mercantilism, capitalism, and socialism. And I explained to you why socialism is inherently selfish and capitalism is inherently selfless, that you have to focus on the wants and needs of others before you can ever get rich, regardless of your motivation. All right, I'm not going to go into all that again. But I saw that I did want to make some comments on one other thing we touched on earlier in this chapter, and that was the Proclamation line of 1763. And the reason I want to discuss this is I don't think I made clear enough when I was going through this the first time that one of the biggest complaints was not just that the British were trying to deny the rights that they had promised immigrants earlier, that is the right to go and settle west of the mountains, but the fact that they changed policies 3 times. First, they said, you can't go beyond this line. And then under pressure, they said, all right, we'll let you go beyond the line. And then again, under pressure, this time from England, they said, no, you can't go beyond the line. And so it was this ongoing indecision and indecisiveness that caused a problem for the colonists, and they really didn't like that. So I just wanted to mention that when you discuss that proclamation line, it's not just the line or just the act. It's, as always with all of these acts, it's the way they are administered, the way they are carried out, the way they are implemented that make people feel that they don't have the rights of Englishmen. They're not being treated as equals, and so on and so forth. All right. So page 69, and the header is the Stamp Act of 1765. Parliament, meanwhile, continued to shift the fiscal burdens from overtaxed landowners in England to the American colonists, with the awareness that the former voted and the latter did not. Attempting to extract a fraction of the cost of troops sent to defend the colonies, Grenville, remember him, Lord Grenville, who, as historian Paul Johnson notes, quote, had a gift for doing the wrong thing, pushed through a stamp tax, which was innocuous in its direct effects, but momentous in its symbolism. The act placed a tax on virtually every paper transaction, because you had to have a stamp put on every paper transaction, which was accompanied by a tax. Marriage certificates, the act placed a tax on virtually every transaction. Marriage certificates, ships papers, legal documents, newspapers, even playing cards and dice were to be stamped and therefore taxed. So consider this. I mean, think about all of the, excuse me, my mouse fell off here. Sorry. Think about all of the papers that we have in our lives today. Now, today we're much more paperified than they were in the 1760s. But you get married and you have a marriage certificate, stamp, tax. You get divorced, got a divorce certificate, stamp, tax. You're born. Most places have a birth certificate, taxed. You die, there's a death certificate, taxed. So one of the concerns, I know it's not going to seem as plausible today, but you got to put yourself back in the time. And one of the concerns was, let me preface this by saying this. We talked a lot about the Puritans and the Pilgrims and their religious beliefs, but one thing I did not mention, they believed in reading the Bible for themselves, not having a priest or a pope read it to them, a bishop, but you read it for yourself and you can interpret it for yourself. Now, you can go too crazy, as Ann Hutchinson, Roger Williams found out, but basically, the early Pilgrims, Puritans, the congregations differed over a variety of small matters in the Bible. Okay. So, what was the manger that Jesus was put in? Was it an actual wooden cow manger? Some new research suggests that it could have been actually a part of the house, and that what is referred to as the inn was actually a lower room area for guests. And there actually was a area for animals that was contained, attached to the house, and that a manger could have been nothing more than just a kind of bowl cut out in the floor. But whether you agree with this or not, the point is they would disagree over some of the smaller things. This isn't going to really matter to your salvation. This isn't going to decide whether or not you go to hell, what your definition of the manger is, right? But the fact that you could read the Bible for yourself was considered critical. This is a very, very important point for the Pilgrims, the Puritans, and the Protestants of New England. So they all had Bibles. They all had Bibles. And this is their thinking when the Stamp Act comes about. If they can tax birth certificates, if they can tax playing cards, how long before these Anglicans seek to tax the Bible? Because the Anglicans did not believe that you should read the Bible for yourself. They viewed the Stamp Act somewhat in a religious lens, not mostly, but you can't discount that there's always, in almost everything we're going to look at going up to the revolution, there's always a religious component to these things, and you can't ignore that. All right. So you are being taxed for virtually everything. You're being taxed for having kids, you're being taxed for people who died, you're being taxed for buying things, being taxed for selling things, you're being taxed across the board. Worse, the act raised the terrifying threat that if paper documents were subject to government taxation control, how long before Puritan, Baptist, Quaker, and Methodist religious tracts or even Bibles came under the oversight of the state? To assume as much was not unrealistic, and certainly Sam Adams argued that this was the logical endpoint. Quote, "The Stamp Act itself was contrived with a design only to inure the people to the habit of contemplating themselves as slaves of men, and the transition from thence to a subjection to Satan is mighty easy," unquote. Although most colonists were alarmed at the precedent set by the Stamp Act, the fact that the newspapers were taxed ensured that the publishing organs of the colonies universally could be aligned against England on the issue. In other words, the media had it in its interest to push back against this tax. Rarely do they have that. But in this case, the media was being attacked, and so they fought back. Hostility to the new act ran far deeper than its narrow impact on newspapers, however. An often overlooked component of the policies involved the potential for ever-expanding hordes of administrators and duty collectors in the colonies. Had the pecuniary burdens been completely inconsequential, the colonists still would have protested the insidious, invasive presence of an army of royal bureaucrats and customs officials. You see consistently in the writings of the early colonials how they believe that they are over-administered, that there are too many bureaucrats, too many agents of the crown. Several organizations were formed for the specific purpose of harassing stamp agents, many under the name Sons of Liberty. They engaged in violence and intimidation of English officials. Imagine that. Destroying the stamps and burning the Boston house of Lieutenant Governor Thomas Hutchinson. How about that? You think Patriot Day J6 was a protest? That ain't no protest. We used to know how to protest, seriously. Sympathetic colonial juries then refused to convict members of the Sons of Liberty, demonstrating that the colonists saw the economic effects as nil, but the political ramifications as substantial. In other words, when you're having ordinary citizens nullify charges, which in my view should have been what happened with the Patriot Day defendants, except your juries are all in DC, so they're not going to do that. That's what should have happened, is that ordinary citizens should have said, we're not going to do this. When police just open doors and let people walk in, we're not going to charge you with a crime. Parliament failed to appreciate the firestorm the new policies were causing. Edmund Burke observed of the House of Commons, quote, "Far from anything inflammatory, I never heard a more languid debate in the House." In the colonies, however, reaction was immediate and dramatic. Virginia again led the way in resistance, focused in the House of Burgesses, with Patrick Henry as the chief spokesman for the instant response. He offered 5 resolutions against the Stamp Act that constituted a radical position. Many strongly disagreed with his views, and a Williamsburg law student named Thomas Jefferson, who witnessed the debates, termed them, quote, "most bloody." Nevertheless, the delegates did not disagree with Henry's assessment of the legality of the act only his methods in responding to them, which many thought could have been more conciliatory. Remember, most people are not interested in independence right now. They want to be treated as Englishmen. They want to be equals. Henry achieved immortality with a provocative tone of his resolutions, reportedly stating, "If this be treason, make the most of it." Leaders from Massachusetts, led by James Otis, agreed. They suggested that the Intercolonial Congress be held at City Hall in New York, a meeting known as the Stamp Act Congress in 1765. Delegates drafted a Bill of Rights and issued a statement of grievances, reiterating the principle of no taxation without representation. By then, mobs had hanged in effigy stamp tax collectors, forcing many to resign their posts. Collectors' homes were torn down in Newport, and a Connecticut collector was buried alive until he voluntarily resigned. Parliament, confronted with unified, outraged opposition, backed down, as they usually will. A new government under the Marquis of Rockingham repealed the Stamp Act in 1766, in no small degree because of internal dissatisfaction with the program in England, where manufacturers had started to lose sales. But other groups in England, particularly landholders who again faced increased tax burdens themselves, denounced the repeal as appeasement. So there's always English politics to consider when you're looking at the American Revolution. In retreat, Parliament issued a declaratory act maintaining it had the authority to pass new laws at any time it so chose, but both sides knew Britain had blinked. In other words, England repeals the act and said, "We can do it again anytime we want, though. You just be careful." But of course, they repealed the act. It was a big victory for Americans. Next header on the top of page 71, a massacre in Boston. After Rockingham was dismissed under pressure from English landlords, the king recalled ailing William Pitt from his peerage to form a new government. Pitt's coalition government included disparate and uncooperative groups, and after 1767, actual power over England's mercantilist policies devolved upon Charles Townshend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, was really kind of the treasurer in England. Under new duties enacted by Parliament, the words changed, but the song remained the same. Small taxes on glass, lead, tea, or other products, but significant shifts of authority to Parliament. This was Parliament's shop-worn tactic: exchange small initial duties for gigantic new powers that could be used later oppressively. But in this case, the revenues from the Townshend duties went to pay the governor's salaries, effectively making an end run around the colonial assemblies and their power of the purse. Remember, we said that the colonial assemblies were controlling American colonial government because they could control the money. Townshend persuaded Parliament to suspend the New York Assembly for its refusal to provide necessary supplies under the Mutiny Act, also called the Quartering Act of 1765. He hoped to isolate New York, even though Massachusetts Assembly similarly had refused to vote funds for supplies. Realizing the presence of the Army headquarters in New York City made it imperative that the English government maintain control of the situation there. Once again, the colonies did not object to the principle of supporting the troops or even quartering them, but instead challenged the authority of Parliament to mandate such support. And by the way, this was one of the major complaints about the vaccine mandates and the lockdowns. Not exclusively, some did, but most did not argue so much that they were wrong, but that they were wrongly implemented. They were implemented without the authority of state legislatures that needed to vote them into effect. And some constitutional scholars I've talked to, others say they would have had no problem with an emergency lockdown of 2 weeks if at the end of that time the legislature called into emergency session could have debated these and ruled on these. Now, again, that line from the Patriot, I'd rather be ruled by one tyrant 3,000 miles away than 1,000 tyrants a mile away, something like that. And the legislatures could have been just as dictatorial and oppressive, but it's just one more step you have to go through before you can rule over people without some kind of check. Let's see. A series of written arguments by Charles C. Pinckney and Edward Rutledge, both of South Carolina, Daniel Delaney of Maryland, and John Dickinson of Pennsylvania, provided a comprehensive critique of the new acts based on English law and traditions. They didn't say we object to these just because we're Americans. They said we object to these because in English law and English tradition, this is what should happen. Dickinson's Letters from a Farmer in Pennsylvania reached wide audiences and influenced groups outside the seaboard elites. British officials were stunned to find that rather than abandoning New York, other colonies expressed their support for their sister colony. No more important ally of New York could exist than Massachusetts, where Sam Adams and a group of vocal followers organized resistance in the Massachusetts Assembly. Letters went out from the Assembly to other colonies, urging them to resist the new taxes and to boycott British goods until the measures were lifted. The missive might have died except for further meddling by the British Secretary of State, who warned that Parliament would dissolve any colonial assemblies that endorsed the position of the Massachusetts Assembly. All the colonies promptly supported the Massachusetts letter, even Pennsylvania, which had refused to support the earlier correspondence. Whereas New York had borne the brunt of England's initial policies, Boston rapidly became the center of revolutionary ferment and British repercussions. Britain transferred 4 regiments of troops from Halifax to Boston, stationing them directly within the city in a defiant symbol of occupation. You got army forces on the corners. Bostonians reacted angrily to the presence of redcoats and lobsterbacks, whereas the soldiers treated citizens rudely and competed with them for off-hour work. Tensions heightened until on March 5th, 1770, a street fight erupted between a mob of 70 or so workers at a shipyard and a handful of British sentries. Snowballs gave way to gunfire from the surrounded and terrified soldiers, leaving 5 colonists dead and 6 wounded. American polemicists such as John Adams lost no time in labeling this the Boston Massacre. Local juries thought otherwise, finding the soldiers guilty of relatively minor offenses, but not murder, thanks in part to the skillful legal defense of John Adams. Adams defended these soldiers from murder, and he caught heck for it too. I mean, he was an outcast for a while. Now, right about here, I think what we're going to do is stop here. And when I pick up on Friday, I'm going to begin by reading from the Patriot's History Reader, our documents book, The Rights of the Colonists by Samuel Adams on page 11 through 15 of the Reader. So for Friday, here's your homework assignment. In addition to having your Patriot's History handy, you'll want to get the Patriot's History Reader and have it open to The Rights of the Colonists by Sam Adams. All right. And I will see you back here Friday, where we will continue with this. We're getting right up to the Tea Party. We're almost there. And I would remind you to go to thewildworldofhistory.com, look under blogs, look everywhere. There are so many free things for kids there. Just look around a little bit and you're going to find so much free stuff. Just search the bar, scroll the bar at the top, and you're going to find all sorts of free stuff in terms of 40 or so mini lessons, 1 to 2 pages that I've written on amazing stuff in American history and history overall, everything from the Crusades to the charge of the Winged Hussars to the making of the atomic bomb to atomic spies. There's all sorts of stuff there. And you're going to see the VIP package. Take a look at that. Look at all the stuff that is included in the VIP, because you're really going to get a lot of lessons beyond this, beyond Patriots history, that you're just going to be amazed by, including Reagan, the American president, the 1620 default, which explains to you in detail why the 1619 project is wrong, many others, okay? And then while you're there looking around, watch the video trailer and buy Larry a coffee, buy me 10. Let's get this series made. And I'll see you guys back here on Friday.